and on today's episode, we are going to be discussing the West Virginia Mountaineers. Now, last episode, we discussed Pittsburgh, we talked about Clemson, so I felt it was kind of fitting that we talk about West Virginia too, especially how West Virginia is also going to be playing Pittsburgh on September 14th. It was just kind of a team on my mind, and I was also thinking about, possibly the Big 12 and doing some segments on that too. So with that said, I mean, it's obvious Neil Brown was obviously on the hot seat last year, and rightfully so. The team was just kind of, mediocre in a lot of degrees. But I think the reason it really came together, for me at least, is West Virginia has an identity now, and they mainly have found that identity through the running game. They are number one, and they're the top team in the Big 12 in terms of rushing attack, and they are number four in the country on the running game. And they've just been kind of going back to the ground and pound sort of game, and it's been really successful for them. Now, granted, obviously they had to lean into that more with Garrett Green, who was a freshman quarterback. He transitioned pretty well. 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions was his stat sheet. So, with that said, there are a lot of positive pieces that are coming back in West Virginia, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And with Neil Brown now getting an extension, that's obviously another big positive for, because I think it's the one thing that a lot of teams who are kind of in that border between being elite versus being average, like kind of that middle ground, is that a lot of these teams don't try as hard as they could be to really bring stability to the program and all of that. Now, granted, there are some circumstances where coaches just naturally take jobs, or the transfer portal, or all of that, but I do believe that the extension was warranted, and he did prove that he can lead this team. Now, granted, 9 wins last year, I think, definitely supersede expectations. I kind of just thought they would flutter in that sort of 4 to 6 win range that we've kind of seen over the past couple of years, but I think ultimately it just speaks to the volume of, the kids obviously believing in Neil Brown, and I think it seems like they are, definitely heading in the right direction. Now, in terms of where I think they can go in 2024, there are, 2 things in my mind that I'm really struggling with in terms of, me saying to myself, can West Virginia really build on that 9? Can they build on that 9 and go to 10 or 11? Which I think, quite frankly, I don't think they're there right now in terms of kind of doing that consistently. To me, the biggest issue to me is the secondary. It's been pretty clear to me that a lot of the defense is kind of moved. Defense is kind of, granted, yes, they've made strides. They've done a lot better, but I think the big issue was there were a lot of injuries last year, and on top of those injuries last year, they simply couldn't get enough going on the pass rush. And also, I think they're also going to have another issue with the amount of transfers that are coming in. So we got 4 new secondary players. There's Grant Hollis, Jameer Joseph coming from Northwestern, Aiden Garnes, who's from Desanique, and TJ Crandall, who transferred from Colorado State. Now, granted, it seems like they've definitely have kind of been hitting the transfer portal as hard as they can, but it's evident to me that they're going to lose some players. That's all there is to it. And yes, they definitely finished in the top half of the league in terms of total yards and points allowed, which compared to kind of previous seasons, it's certainly in the step in the right direction. But when you have teams like if you have teams like Penn State coming to town, you have teams like Kansas that you have to play, and Arizona and Cincinnati, you can't really afford to have kind of a mediocre defense, really. And we'll talk about the schedule in a second, but I think that's also alluding to why I'm not seeing as many 9-10 win expectations as I guess you would want coming from a team who just won 9 games. Now, I think granted, they definitely did try to address the pass rush. It seems like they brought in some transfers. I haven't done my scouting report on them, but the FCS standout Ty French coming out. Gardner Webb is obviously the biggest name from that class, and they also brought in another transfer, T.J. Jackson from Troy University, who will also be kind of filling in there too. So with all that said, I mean, I think for one, I mean, you know, injuries are part of the game, and it is what it is on that front. But it seems like they definitely have tried to bring in as many transfers as possible to kind of get in that sort of win now mode. Now they are going to have to play some younger guys, some freshmen and sophomores, which is all right because especially on the offensive side of the ball, you're a lot more prepared because you added Oklahoma State transfer Jalen Bray, you have Garrett Green coming back, 2,400 yards, and he ran for 772. So Green combining with Jaheim White should be a big upgrade, and I would expect a lot of the same of what they did last year, and quite frankly, doubling down. And as somebody who, even when I watch on TV and when I play college football and when I play Madden, I'm definitely more of a kind of a run first type of coach. So for me, just as a fan, I enjoy watching West Virginia football and seeing have that kind of dual threat in the backfield, and I'm super excited to see where that's going to go. Now that we kind of talked about the positives in terms of we have Garrett Green coming back, we have Jalen Bray coming, we have Jaheim White coming back also. I think we also kind of just need to address the schedule a little bit too. I think the big difference between what we've seen with West Virginia's schedule versus some of the schedules that you might see elsewhere in the Big 12, such as Utah, Kansas State, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Arizona, is when I look at the schedule, I don't see many give me sort of wins when I look at the schedule. Starting off the year, playing Penn State. Granted, you get them home, but right now I'm not really seeing them being strong enough to be able to knock off Penn State. That would be an incredible win, but as you get through the schedule, the first thing I'm kind of thinking to myself is I think they're gonna get to a bowl game. I think bowl game's obviously gonna have to be the goal, but if you really want to get to that 8 or 9 sort of threshold that we did last year, there's gonna have to be an upset or two. So when we look, we have you have a tune-up game versus Albany. Pittsburgh, West Virginia is always close, and it's at Pittsburgh this time. Like I said, that won't go either way, and I'm a little biased with Pittsburgh too, so I don't want to count Pittsburgh out, but let's just take a look at the rest. So then you're home versus Kansas, then you're going to Stillwater the week after. Who, by the way, when I think of this Oklahoma State team, it's to me the favorites are either Utah or Oklahoma State. So I'm not really there with the West Virginia hype of winning the Big 12 championship. Do I think they'll finish in the top 5? Yeah, but they're not at that level that Oklahoma State or Utah are at right now. And then even when I look at the rest of the schedule, Iowa State, they are probably one of the most mediocre programs of all college football, kind of always in that sort of 5 to 7 win range, which is not always a bad thing. I mean, granted, the Cyclones, they've had some ups and downs here and there, but I can't recall in the last maybe 5-10 years where we've actually heard people say, oh yeah, I'm ready, Iowa State's going to kind of turn and get to that 9-10 win threshold. We don't really ever see that from them, but I do. The one thing about Iowa State and all Iowa teams in general is that they're gritty and they're going to play you tough. And even when I look at this gauntlet here, you got Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona, Cincinnati, Baylor, UCF. I look at those 6 games. I think they're favored about 3 or 4 of them, but I don't think you could really definitively say, other than perhaps Baylor and probably Iowa State, that should be, yes, that should definitely be a win. I think you can make the argument with Kansas State, with Cincinnati. UCF's flying under the radar too. They They got KJ Jefferson too from Arkansas, so I'm not going to write them off at all. And Gus Malzahn, I don't think I've said this on the program yet, but to me, he's one of the most underrated coaches in the entire country. And his interview with Josh Pate was great, by the way. So that's definitely worth listening to if you haven't yet. And then they finish off the year with Texas Tech. So I mean, I think obviously you can match that 9-win total from last year. If I'm a West Virginia fan, I'd be pretty freaking happy. I'd be saying to myself, okay, sure, you want to build off the 9 wins by getting to 10 or 11, but when you look at the schedule, I'm not seeing 9 to 10 wins on this schedule. However, I do think they are going to pull out some of these wins against the Kansas States or Baylor or in Arizona. I think they're gonna get a lot more of those wins than we might perhaps think, but I think they are going to take a little bit of a step back because I do think the defense is going to have to be on the field a little bit longer. I do think West Virginia's offense could be fine. I think even more than ever they could even be. I think you might even make the argument they might be able to lead the NCAA in rushing this year. So what I anticipate seeing from West Virginia in 2024, I think they're going to double down on the run game a lot more because I do think they see that their defense is a liability to some degree. So any way where you can control the line of scrimmage and make sure that the defense isn't on the field as much is going to be paramount. I think we're going to have to see a lot of development, particularly on the defensive side of the ball with the plethora of transfers that I've seen. I think we're also going to have to see, can they recover from a lot of those injuries because, they had kind of an injury bug last year, and in order to, kind of make it to that next level, the injuries are just going to have to be reduced. And then lastly, like I said, I see a bowl game. I definitely see a bowl game here, but I think what would really turn heads is if you look at the schedule and they have another 8 to 9 win season. I think that would really further solidify them on the map, and I think you're going to make a lot of comparisons to, because a lot of people forget too, when, back in the day, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when they had Pat White, and back in 2007 and 2009 through 2007 2009 before Pat White was with the Dolphins, they were one of the top 10, 15 programs in the country. So with that said, I definitely think they have the foundation to get where they want to be, and I think the rush attack is going to be so much fun to watch, and I think it's really just going to come down to how long can that defense really survive, and how much are they going to be able to get that pass rush going, because if they're going to have any sort of similarity to last year, that pass rush needs to be addressed, and they can't go up as many passing yards in the air either, because at the end of the day, the secondary can only cover for so long.